The return of the Jews to 17th century England. The 17th century saw the rise of a vast number of Protestant movements which separated from the Church of England. These groups, known as Dissenters, were often concerned with the Jewish people and converting them to Christianity because they saw this as a precursor to the return of Christ. However, many of these groups held very exotic ideas outside the mainstream of Christianity. Some were focused around their particular leader, some were overly concerned with eschatology and the imminent return of Christ. Some believed themselves prophets with special knowledge of God's plans. However, many were very sound in their beliefs and formed the basis of nonconformist Christianity in England. The Church of England, as the established church, wanted complete unity of belief and worship in England, and attempted to ostracise the dissenters and restrict their gatherings around the country. If you're interested in this subject, I've done a video on Richard Hooker, the Anglican theologian. The Jewish presence in England continued to grow from the time of Cromwell onwards, despite the tumultuous arguments between Catholics and Protestants, and between Protestants themselves. Studies of Hebrew had been steadily growing in England since the early 16th century. One of the main figures in this movement was Emmanuel Tremellius, a converted Jew who became the third Regius Professor of Hebrew at Cambridge between 1549 and 1553. In the 17th century, the Jews themselves became an ever-present part of English society. Following the Whitehall conferences with Oliver Cromwell in 1655, and Cromwell's verbal promise that Jews could return to England, attitudes towards the Jewish people changed, especially among Protestants. For example, James Harrington in 1656 proposed in his book Oceana that the Jews should be allowed to settle in Ireland, to, as he said, plant it with Jews, allowing them their own rights and laws. Despite all the religious arguments that were going on, the Jews always seemed to find favour with the rulers in England, firstly with Cromwell and the Protectorate, then with Charles II. When Charles was in Bruges, prior to his restoration in 1660, Dutch Jews helped him with funds and practical support to reclaim the throne. After his restoration, Charles felt gratitude to the Jewish people for the support they had given him. During his reign, 48 Sephardic Jews were naturalized by Charles. These Sephardic Jews were the Jews who came from mainly Spain and Portugal. Bizarrely, the Jews had found favour with both Cromwell and Charles II. The post-Restoration period saw increased social acceptance of the Jews. One interesting event was the arrival in 1674 of Jacob Jehuda Leon and his model of Solomon's Temple, which toured the country. The model caught the attention of Charles II, the general public, and major figures, such as the Archbishop of Canterbury and Isaac Newton. Christopher Wren, a leading Freemason, arranged for the display of the model in London for the Royal Society. In 1688, the Glorious Revolution occurred when the daughter of James II, Mary, and her Dutch husband William of Orange deposed James II after fears in England about his Catholic sympathies. Like James II, William had the backing of Jewish financiers. The Jewish banker Francisco Lopez Soaso lent him 2 million guilders. William had seen religious toleration working in the Dutch Republic and was consistently friendly towards the Jewish people. Capitalism grew alongside the rise in Protestantism in this period, and both these forces proved beneficial to the Jews. The increasing social status of the Jews was shown in 1700, when Sir Solomon de Medina, an army contractor for William III, became the first Jew to be knighted in England. An interesting statistic is that in the late 17th century, the Jews contributed towards 1/12 of England's overseas trade. I got that statistic from Harold Pollin's Economic History of the Jews in England, published in 1982. The end of the 17th century saw something of a tempering of the extreme religious fervour of earlier in the century. In its place, came an increase in a belief in reason and tolerance. This too was helpful to the integration of Jews in society. It was only with the evangelical revival later in the 18th century that the desire to evangelize the Jews was rekindled. So thank you for listening. If you found this information interesting, you can find more information at prophecy-workshop.com.